The decision, which caught Washington off guard, has triggered an immediate surge in gas, oil, and electricity prices across the nation. From daily commutes to air travel, the impact affects every sector of American life. The aviation industry is particularly hard hit, with fuel costs threatening to ground flights and increase ticket prices dramatically. Behind this move lies years of tension over U.S. trade policies. Washington's heavy tariffs on Canadian goods and dismissive attitude toward Canadian concerns has prompted our northern neighbor to take action. Canada has pivoted toward new partnerships with China and India, signing contracts that redirect its energy resources to these emerging economic powers. The strategic shift extends beyond Asia, with Canada now positioning itself as a major energy supplier to European markets. This realignment comes as Europe seeks to diversify its energy sources. Canadian export infrastructure is being rapidly reconfigured to serve these new markets, impacting U.S. energy security. The immediate consequences are visible, with states like New York, California, and Michigan facing potential rolling blackouts, particularly as winter approaches. The disruption of hydroelectric supply from Canada has left these regions vulnerable, forcing authorities to consider emergency measures. This crisis represents more than an energy shortage. It marks a fundamental shift in global energy dynamics, with the United States finding itself suddenly relegated to a weakened position in international energy markets. As prices climb and supplies dwindle, Americans are left wondering, how did we let this crucial partnership slip away? In today's breaking news, America faces a severe energy crisis as production cuts sweep across major industries, threatening jobs and economic stability. Major manufacturers, including automotive and steel industries, are reducing output due to high energy costs. This affects thousands of American jobs, particularly in energy-intensive sectors, with some facilities shutting down production lines. As we approach an energy winter, Americans face unprecedented price increases everywhere. From gas to groceries, the cost surge is clear. The halt of $13 billion in Canadian oil exports has left U.S. energy systems struggling, despite Washington's efforts. Meanwhile, European allies are decreasing dependence on American military support. The EU announced an €800 billion defense program for 2030, shifting away from U.S. weapons systems amid concerns about America's reliability as a partner. Rasmus Joff, Danish Defense Committee chairman, warned about risks of relying on U.S. military equipment. European defense experts question potential kill switches in American-made weapons that could allow remote disabling of equipment sold to allies. The situation challenges America's global standing. As partners seek alternatives to U.S. military technology, Canada's pivot towards Asian energy markets compounds America's problems. Energy instability and declining international trust create a complex crisis for Washington. Analysts suggest this could start a broader economic downturn. With Canada forming energy contracts with China and India, the U.S. faces tough choices. The mix of domestic economic pressures and international changes poses major challenges for American policymakers. The key question remains, can the U.S. navigate these challenges before facing a full economic crisis? Success may depend on rebuilding trust with allies while finding new energy sources in a competitive global market. In a startling development that's reshaping global defense alliances, multiple U.S. allies are pushing back against American military equipment sales policies and diplomatic pressure. Our investigation reveals growing international concern over the U.S. approach to weapons sales and territorial ambitions. Former President Trump's controversial statement about deliberately selling weakened military equipment to allies has triggered a significant backlash. We like to tone them down about 10%. Which probably makes sense because someday maybe they're not our allies, Trump stated at the White House, raising alarm among traditional partners. This revelation has prompted several nations, including Canada, Portugal, and France, to re-evaluate their F-35 fighter jet orders. Many are now turning to European or Australian manufacturers for their defense needs. The European Union has launched its ambitious Readiness 2030 program, allocating €800 billion for defense procurement, notably excluding both the US and UK from future defense plans. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made the EU's position clear. We need to prepare for a scenario where the US is no longer a strategic partner. This marks a historic shift in transatlantic relations. Canada's pivot towards Australia further exemplifies this trend. Prime Minister Mark Carney has announced a 6 billion Canadian dollar cooperation project with Australia for developing the over-the-horizon long-range radar system, deliberately bypassing U.S. partnership. Adding to these tensions, the controversial puppy diplomacy approach in Greenland, where Usha Vance, wife of Senator J.D. Vance, made an unofficial visit, has angered Denmark. Danish officials emphasize that Greenland has been Danish territory since 1380, twice as long as the United States has existed. This global pushback against U.S. policies extends from North America to Europe, as nations increasingly assert their sovereignty and seek alternative partnerships. The shift suggests a fundamental transformation in international defense relationships and a decline in U.S. influence over traditional allies. In a remarkable display of international solidarity, nations worldwide are uniting to protect their sovereignty and self-determination, particularly in response to challenges faced during and after the Trump administration. This shift in global politics is reshaping traditional alliances and power structures. Mexico leads with President Claudia Sheinbaum gaining unprecedented public support, boasting an 85% approval rating. Over 35,000 Mexican citizens flooded the streets within 48 hours, demonstrating their commitment to national independence. "Our sovereignty is non-negotiable," declared President Sheinbaum to the crowds. Meanwhile, Canada's political landscape has transformed. From former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien to current PM Mark Carney, Canadian leaders have united in an extraordinary show of political consensus. This unity emerges as Canada faces mounting trade pressures, with all major political parties standing firm against external economic coercion. Across the Atlantic, European nations are forging stronger alliances independent of U.S. influence. Leaders from France, Germany, and Italy are spearheading efforts to establish a more balanced global order. This European coalition represents a break from traditional diplomatic patterns, emphasizing autonomous decision-making and regional solidarity. In the northern Black Sea region, a politically turbulent territory continues to demonstrate resilience. Under President Zelensky's leadership, this former Soviet republic has garnered increasing international support. Local support for leadership has strengthened, reflecting growing confidence in national institutions. This global trend signifies a pivotal moment in international relations, as nations increasingly prioritize sovereign interests over traditional power dynamics. The movement represents a fundamental shift in how countries approach diplomatic relations and national security in the modern era. In a stunning display of international defiance, global attitudes toward U.S. leadership have hit historic lows. Recent polls from the former Soviet Republic show nearly 70% unity in their fight to protect democracy, setting a stark contrast to declining U.S. influence worldwide. The Trump administration's confrontational policies have triggered unprecedented backlash from both allies and adversaries. Canada's new Prime Minister Mark Carney has emerged as a challenger to U.S. economic dominance. This former Bank of Canada governor and Bank of England chief is wielding his economic expertise against Washington's trade policies. "Canada will never be America's subordinate," declared Carney, responding to Trump's 25% tariffs on Canadian steel, lumber, and auto parts. This marks a shift in U.S.-Canada relations, with Ottawa working to reduce its 73% export dependency on the United States. The story mirrors the Greenland incident, where Trump's attempt to purchase the territory was met with resistance. Greenland's government rejected U.S. advances, showing smaller nations can defend their sovereignty against superpower pressure. Carney's approach differs from traditional political maneuvering. As an economist who guided Canada through the 2008 crisis and helped the UK weather Brexit, he bases decisions on data rather than political expediency. This development comes as multiple nations seek independence from Washington's unilateral decision-making. Trump's declining credibility, coupled with abrupt policy changes and threats to allies, has created a gap between the U.S. and global partners. The question emerges: are we witnessing the beginning of a trade war between the U.S. and its closest ally? More importantly, could this signal a broader shift in global power dynamics? Experts suggest this could represent a turning point in international relations, with implications beyond North American trade. As countries re-examine their relationships with Washington, the era of unchallenged U.S. dominance may be ending. Breaking news from North America, as tensions escalate between the United States and its largest trading partner. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney is launching unprecedented countermeasures against U.S. trade policies, potentially reshaping the global economic landscape. In a bold move that's sending shockwaves through markets, Canada is implementing massive tariffs on key American industries, while expanding trade with the European Union and BRICS nations. This strategic pivot aims to reduce Canada's dependence on U.S. markets. What's catching Washington's attention is Carney's plan to challenge American economic power, the U.S. dollar itself. At the Jackson Hole Economic Summit, Carney proposed a new global currency system, backed by central bank digital currencies, that could alter international trade dynamics. The world shouldn't be at the mercy of the Federal Reserve's decisions, Carney stated, addressing the impact of U.S. monetary policy on global inflation and market stability. The timing is critical, as Donald Trump's aggressive tariffs on Canadian steel, lumber, and agricultural products have pushed relations to a breaking point. Unlike previous confrontations, Canada isn't backing down. This isn't just another trade dispute, says economic expert James Morrison. We're watching the potential restructuring of North American economic power in real time. Carney's strategic approach contrasts with Trump's aggressive tactics. While the U.S. president relies on economic pressure and tariff threats, Canada's leader is building international alliances and alternative trading partnerships. The question now facing investors and policymakers: is this the beginning of the end for U.S. economic dominance in North America? With Canada actively seeking to diversify trade and challenging dollar hegemony, the stakes couldn't be higher. Trading floors worldwide are monitoring this situation, as any shift in U.S.-Canada relations could trigger changes throughout the global financial system. In an unprecedented move that could reshape North American energy dynamics, Canada is considering severe restrictions on electricity and oil exports to the United States, potentially triggering an energy crisis that would affect millions of Americans. This development comes in response to Washington's proposed 25% tariff on Canadian imports. The stakes are enormous. The U.S. currently depends on Canada for 40 trillion watt-hours of electricity annually and 4 million barrels of oil daily, representing 67% of total U.S. oil imports. States like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota are particularly vulnerable. This isn't just about power bills going up, says energy analyst Michael Richardson. We're looking at possible rolling blackouts, manufacturing shutdowns, and major economic disruptions across the northern United States. Ontario is leading the charge with plans to potentially cut electricity supplies to U.S. states. Canada is actively expanding its energy partnerships with Asian markets, particularly China and Japan. The completion of the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline in 2024 gives Canada a crucial advantage: the ability to redirect massive oil exports to Asian markets, potentially leaving the U.S. in an energy vacuum. This is a watershed moment in U.S.-Canada relations, explains trade expert Sarah Martinez. Canada's message is clear. They're ready to break free from U.S. economic dominance, and they have the leverage to do it. The timing couldn't be worse for American consumers, with summer approaching and energy demand set to spike. Industry experts predict potential price increases of up to 40% if Canadian supplies are restricted. As Washington weighs its response, the question remains: can the U.S. afford to lose its most reliable energy partner? With few alternatives available, America's energy security hangs in the balance. The coming weeks will be crucial as both nations navigate this economic showdown that could alter North American energy dynamics for decades. Breaking news: America's energy independence faces unprecedented challenges as Canada's decision to halt $13 billion in energy exports threatens to destabilize the U.S. economy. Our analysis reveals a complex web of dependencies that can't be untangled overnight. Industry experts warn that U.S. refineries, specifically designed for Canadian heavy crude, can't simply switch to alternative suppliers. Mark Thompson, energy analyst at Goldman Sachs, explains, "It's like trying to run a diesel engine on regular gasoline. Technically possible, but highly inefficient." The situation mirrors recent global energy disruptions, similar to what European nations experienced during their transition away from Russian energy supplies. America's predicament could prove even more challenging given the deep integration of Canadian power into the U.S. grid system. Particularly vulnerable are the Midwest and Northeast regions, where Canadian natural gas has been a reliable source for both industrial operations and residential heating. James Martinez, former Department of Energy advisor, notes, "We're looking at potential price spikes of 30–40% in these regions if alternative sources aren't secured quickly." While domestic production could fill the gap, industry insiders estimate it would take 18 to 24 months to achieve meaningful production increases. This timeline assumes optimal conditions and significant infrastructure investment. The situation has triggered emergency meetings in Washington, with sources indicating that both countries' representatives are exploring diplomatic solutions. The stakes are high. American consumers face potentially soaring energy bills, while businesses grapple with increased operational costs. Wall Street analysts predict this energy standoff could shave up to 1.5% off U.S. GDP if prolonged through winter. The crisis highlights America's vulnerability in what many assumed was an unshakable energy partnership with its northern neighbor. As negotiations continue behind closed doors, the question remains: will economic reality force both nations back to the table before irreversible damage occurs?